Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here. You don't even know how much it is because I'm from East Tennessee and I've spent a lot of time here, and you'll see all that in the slides. But driving down 321 from Boone was really kind of special today for me. But I'd like to thank John and Joshua and everybody, Ashley and Amanda, and everybody who made it possible, and especially Mike Smith, who I've admire so much and really a big fan, and I'm very happy to be here in his department and talking about photography. Well, in his department, I don't know. But anyway, so here's the way this is going to work. I'm going to do a lecture. It's probably going to take about 50 minutes. Then it's going to be over, and I made a movie last year, 14 minutes long. And so if y'all have to go somewhere, don't worry about it, and you can leave. But then I'm going to show the movie kind of after the lecture. It'll be like the dessert after the meal. So it's weird. After you see the movie, that metaphor might not be so pertinent. But let's go ahead and start now. And I'll start by getting myself ready here. We'll start by showing a movie.
Listen, what are you so anxious about this? Because they're building a dam across the Coolawasi River. They're going to flood a whole valley, Bobby. That's why. Damn it, they're drowning the river. They're drowning the river, man. All right. Just about the last. All right. Good talk, indeed. All right. Just about the last wild, untamed, unpolluted, unfucked up river in the sun. We understand what you're saying. There ain't gonna be no more river. It's just gonna be a big dead. That's shit.
Very clean way of making electric power. And those lakes up there provide a lot of use and recreation.
I don't give a shit.
My father-in-law has a houseboat on Lake Bowie.
You just push a little more power. You push a little more power in Atlanta. A little more air conditioners for your small little suburb. And you know what's gonna happen? We're gonna rape this whole goddamn landscape. We're gonna rape all of us, Mike.
And it's an extreme point of view.
It is.
Extremist.
So we all know what happens next, right? Squeal like a pig! So that's Deliverance. It's kind of funny because that movie was made 20 years before a lot of you people were born, but it still occupies this indelible place in our cultural consciousness. Even if you're not from the Southern Appalachian Mountains, Deliverance it's coined a stereotype that is indelible. It seems like it will never go away. Now, in my neck of the woods, this movie is really reviled, but it's also very respected. And part of the reason that stereotype is so, it transcends ages and generations is because the movie cuts at a lot of really, really strong and truths about the region. Basically, it's about people and the landscape, and what is happening to the landscape is also happening to people. And it's about tourist versus native, progress versus nature, man versus the wild, civilization versus the primitive. Now, all these battles are kind of tied up in these performances of masculinity, and these contests of survival and dominance over the landscape, the American wilderness. And that landscape in this movie plays a role as a character. It's not really a setting. It's a character. The river actually changes during the movie, and it plays this role as a character. And that's what I think people who live close to the mountains or who are familiar with this kind of landscape really tap into. Now, I grew up outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, about 60 miles as a crow flies from where Deliverance was filmed on the Watauga River. And oddly enough, it came on a Sunday night movie when I was a kid, as 11 years old, and it was like a Sunday night movie, and I was a family, we always watched a Sunday night movie, and here comes Deliverance. Well, for me, I lived in a very rural place with streams and rocks and caves, and it put into kind of an adolescent these notions of dominance, sexuality, the sublime landscape of the Appalachian foothills into like this big blender in my mind, and it basically taught me about the wilderness and what I kind of term the new wilderness, and that the wilderness is no longer animals and sublime wild landscapes, but the wilderness is man. And the wildness of my boundless woods around our place at home suddenly became this side of kind of fear for me, because there were the Lowry boys with their motorcycles, and there were men. So the Deliverance changed me from being like afraid of Sasquatch and Bigfoot and rattlesnakes and grizzly bears, which there were none of, into being afraid of what is really wild, which is us. Even though I'm an artist professionally, at heart I'm a biologist, and when I look at a landscape, I look at an ecosystem. And when I look at a portrait or a human, I look at an animal. Our animal instincts are alive and well, and they simmer away beneath our modernity. And my role as an artist is trying to describe that as it seeps out. This is the quote that I really go back to a lot. It's from Henry David Thoreau that he wrote just kind of offhandedly in a journal entry in 1849. He says, "It is vain to dream of a wildness distant from ourselves. There is none such. It is the bog in our brains and bowels, the primitive vigor of nature in us, that inspires that dream." So these are some of the themes as I show you my work, and I'm kind of going to span about 20 years of work out of sequence. But these are some of the themes to keep in mind as I go through and show you my work. So let's start from the beginning. I don't think my little thing is. I came out of Duke University with a zoology degree, but a real to answer your question, how I got into photography, I really wanted to be a wildlife photographer, and I did that for a lot of summers and when I was at Duke, and I took lots of pictures of wildlife, and I got in camo, and I had a camo camera and a 300 millimeter long lens, and took pictures of deer and stuff, and quickly realized deer basically do about the same thing in every picture. They either look up or look down, or they don't really, not really, and my pictures look like every other person's pictures of deer. So, but I was also interested in human evolution and culture and society problems and the social injustice, and so. As wildlife got me into photography, photography took over and took me down this branch of social justice photography. I was more like a journalist than anything. So I spent some time with migrant workers, with a migrant worker family for a couple years. And this is Arturo, James, and Maito in the back of a pickup truck on the last day of tobacco harvest in 4 Oaks, North Carolina. And you could see how I was translating the knowledge that I got from history of photography classes into my own work. This is, of course, Migrant Mother by Dorothy Lang, one of my favorite photographers. And she had this knack of photographing people as almost like heroic, almost like epic Greek heroic gestures. Look at the gestures. She was so facile. She was the heroine of the human gesture. She kind of got down low, and it looks like a Greek statue applied to a North Texas pea picker in this case. And so you can see how I'm totally mimicking her, even subconsciously, with my pictures of Reyes Orozco here in 1990. Dorothea Lange, 1934, Jeff Whetstone, 1991. So I really kind of internalized Dorothea Lange. So I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just, it's kind of uncanny to see it. And it was, I was doing this work, and I also started reading about photography, and I read Susan Sontag's On Photography, and that kind of paralyzed me from doing the work I was doing in a while, because it made me focus on what am I actually doing with these pictures? It kind of became like, I have this really interest in social justice issue, and I love photography. Why don't I like marry these two and see if I can use a camera for these you know, to confront social justice issues? And as I photographed more and more, the camera ended up kind of making, the photography became its own animal. I started making other kinds of pictures like this one. And after reading Susan Sontag, I didn't know if my pictures, what I had to kind of confront what I wanted out of photography. Did I want to be a photographer, an artist? Was that it? If so, was I capitalizing on the poverty of this family to make myself a photographer, right? Or was it about explicitly looking at the social justice issues? And then what was my photography saying? So all this kind of got mixed up into a blender. And I made this image, which you'll see this referred to on and on through my photography, where the man is kind of folding into the landscape. And I went with that, kind of. I moved to Kentucky and worked at Apple Shop in Whitesburg, Kentucky. Anybody know Apple Shop in here? All right, so I worked at Apple Shop for 5 years, and I started making these pictures where the humans and landscape became kind of one thing. This is Doc Frazier, a neighbor of mine, in a cornfield. And this is a hog killing that happened at a house up the creek from me. So where really kind of formal exercises, really more than anything, about trying to blend these shapes and forms. And that's when I kind of noticed how the landscape, how we think, we have a notion that we're humans, and so we'll do with the landscape what we want to do with it, and our culture will form the landscape. But kind of in my biological training, I was kind of trained to look at it differently. It's like, no, the landscape actually makes us do what it wants to do. In this case, Kentucky, the hollers are really tight. And so the stereotypes of clannishness and all that comes about. Well, there's a little bit of truth to that, because you could live really close to people, and all this land is in air, so everybody kind of lived in this little bit of flat land between these steep mountains. But then it was a long way to the next holler. You'd have to like go out this road and drive about 20 miles just to go over the side of that mountain. So you have a lot of close-knitness, and then you also have a lot of separation. And in this picture I tried to get at, well, that's the land kind of forming the people to its will. Of course, in Kentucky, the opposite happens too. I mean, in eastern Kentucky, this is the story, you know. This is strip mining. This is the Carcassonne Mountain, which is actually now gone. And this is just a picture of strip mining. Basically, they're blasting the mountain to get this real thin seam of coal out, which they truck out and probably bring here and run this projector off of. So, so there's this back and forth between humans forming the land and the land forming human culture. That's what I'm really interested in. This is became most succinctly put right here. This picture was made in Elizabethton in 1940. This is from a family archive. My extended family's from Elizabethton, Hampton, and Butler, and Fish Springs, which, if you don't know, these are towns not too far from here. This was when the dam was coming in, the Watauga Dam, and the TVA made these parades that went through town kind of advertising for the dam, getting local support for the flooding of the valley, because people were very much against being pulled off the land that they've had since 1750. So power, beauty, progress. And this is Cardin's Bluff. This is the picture of the Watauga Dam and the bluff that was there. I did this project through Appleshop called Before the Flood, Watauga Recollection, where through old family photographs, TV photographs, and oral histories, I rebuilt the Watauga Valley. And I think it might still be up on view in Old Butler. I think it's kind of on permanent display there. But there's Deliverance happening in 1941. Right? That's exactly what Deliverance is about, is the damming of this wild river. And then this is one of my great-uncles, great-great-uncles in the land between Watauga, between Cardin's Bluff and Fish Springs. I had a cousin who was a photographer, a kind of a lay photographer. She had a Kodak Brownie and a dime store in Elizabethton she would bring her film to, and she photographed everybody moving out of their houses on the day they were moving out. So, and then wrote all the script of their homes. That's what we see today, of course. And this is another TVA photograph of the lake. And this is Aunt Ruth. She was the last person in my family. She was kind of the matriarch who remembers actually living in Fish Springs. And the thing she did the last 30 years of her life was go out on the houseboat on Watauga Lake and fish. And they did it almost 3 or 4 times a week during the warm periods. And she had this kind of memory that she described in pictures. And we'd be out on the houseboat, and she would say, well, I guess about right here would be where the old schoolhouse was. Now, up in here, that was this big ridge, and it had all these blueberries on it. And then back this way was the Rainbolt's house. Now, you're heir to this strip of land that kind of comes up through here. And she would describe it as if she was looking at a photograph. And, we're on a giant, just kind of big old body of water. And so it kind of struck me that the only way this, it's not even on any maps anymore, but the only way that this survives is through her memory, and she's gone now, and through photographs. Basically, that's it. And so the power of photography became really real to me doing this project. Did you go to sleep on me? Oh, no. Okay. So after that project, I went to graduate school, and I started studying landscape photography. I just wanted to kind of make landscapes when I was in New Haven. And I discovered this photographer named Timothy O'Sullivan, who made these, I call him, this is 1870. He was just gotten out of the Civil War. He was Tom Brady, he was Matthew Brady's, Tom Brady. You can tell I watched the Super Bowl. He was Matthew Brady's assistant, and he's seen a lot of carnage. This is kind of my own idea of what Timothy O'Sullivan was like. And he was like looking at old landscapes. You think of like the 1870s of this time of this kind of landscape, which was painted in 1870. This is Alfred Bierstadt, a painter who painted these glorious landscapes of the West. So this is what people thought of the West when they thought, you know, of the Indian Wars and the Louisiana Purchase, and this was what we thought of the West. It's certainly, you know, religious, spiritual, even godly. And so the U.S. government sent O'Sullivan with a U.S. Geological Survey out on the 40th parallel to photograph the West, and this is what he came back with, this picture. And he was kind of like a death metal photographer. If there was such a death metal photographer in 1870, he was like, all of his pictures are horribly oppressive. You know, they're just like rocks in your face. You can't get over them. You're going to have to confront that. That's what you're looking at. And I think it's basically because I think he was a fatalist in a way. After he'd seen the Civil War, his pictures became very, very just hard. It's how fluid, and I think he's an instance of how fluid a personal vision can be of the landscape. Like the landscape is in some ways a very blank canvas, and you project your vision on it, right? As photographers, it's hard to think about that, the camera being a mechanical device, right? But you can project this on the landscape, and you can project this on the landscape. This is Mountain of the Holy Cross, made by William Henry Jackson, the same year in the same area of Timothy O'Sullivan. So you see the cross there. Well, it's kind of been photoshopped in, and it's also kind of like the perfect time of year, but the Senate, U.S. Senate, rallied around this picture saying, yes, you know, this is a sign that the West is meant for Christian expansion. You know, this is manifest destiny as told by science, because photography was not an art then, it was a science. So this is like, this is the real thing. This is the sign from God to come westward, right? And at the same year, Timothy O'Sullivan was like, don't go anywhere. Stay where you are. You know, so you can see these two photographers really like having a very personal vision. There was one more photographer from that era, Carlton Watkins, who is my favorite, and he photographed in a very nuanced way. In all of his photographs from this period, there's like human development in the foreground, and it's always kind of sloppy, you know, it's not really all perfect. And in the background, this kind of untouched nature, like this one. And he's basically photographing the folly of the human endeavor. And I mean, this is 1870, seeing kind of what we all believe today as we're kind of fatalist and, you know, it's 2012 and, you know, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. He was doing this same kind of work poetically. Speeded up 100 years to Los Angeles. This is Robert Adams. He's kind of like the Dorothea Lange of landscape photography. He's like, it's all about the gesture of the landscape. And I really got into him when I was in grad school. So that's another, these are LA Springs. So I kind of applied all that to my home in the South and made landscapes that had some kind of gestural or cultural significance of some sort. So this one really kind of touches the biologist in me, and especially someone who studied human evolution. So beautiful backdrop, and then there's the fishing chair, and then at every fishing hole you see the same thing. You know, a 40 ounce, the little styrofoam thing with worms, a bunch of fishing lines, some trash, empty pack of cigarettes, potato chips, right? And so when I was photographing this, I was wandering around in this woods that was kind of private, public land. No one knew, it's a kind of a floodplain, so no one really owns it. So I'm wandering around and I like see this, and like my hackles go up on my neck, and I'm like, oh shit, you know, I'm like wandered into somebody's fishing hole. And I'm like, why am I having this like the scientist in me is like, why am I having this reaction? Like, I'm just like walking around. Why am I like all of a sudden nervous? Well, and then I'm also thinking, people just are ignorant litterers. I mean, why can't they just clean this up? And at the same time, I'm going, and I'm nervous. And then I'm starting to realize, oh, okay, so what I've just picked up on is a territorial marker, right? Yeah, it's lazy people throwing trash down, but it's also indicating to people like me, this is not a state park sanctuary thing for like, you know, a pleasant place for that's protected. This is my fishing hole. Don't think that you're, you know, in this bucolic nature preserve. This is where I fish. So that's what's indicated by the trash. And so I'm like, anyway, that's the kind of things I like pick up on, and that's a very biological. That's what I mean when we're acting on our instincts. Sometimes there's an instinct to mark territory, and I think that's kind of about what that is. The fishing chair. And this is a blown out target. I wish I could have like taken that home with me. I just had to take a picture of it. This is on Douglas Lake. This is the drawdown, like when they draw the water down out of Douglas Lake. Basically, people bring all their trash, dead deer, dead animals, and throw it in the lake, and then the water fills up, and all that stuff floats up to the surface for about like, you know, a few days, and then it finally settles back down. But this print is kind of large. These are all taken with an old-timey 8x10-inch camera, kind of like what Timothy Sullivan used. So it's very detailed, and you can't see it in this, but that says scenic. So when the water was all the way up, somebody rode out there or went out there in a boat and spray painted scenic on the old corn silo, and so it made this. I don't know if it was an ironic statement or what. It still is kind of mystery to me. When I was photographing landscapes, I kind of like, I'm using this big camera with, you know, it weighs about 40 pounds or something, and it's a big tripod, and the landscape is kind of still. And I started missing the narrative. I felt like an architectural photographer kind of, and I started like missing the narrative of people in the picture. And so I started painting right after that. No, just kidding. This is, I would love to pass this off. This is one of my favorite pieces of art. This is Peter Bruegel from 1560s, a Flemish painter in the kind of the Flemish Renaissance or Northern Renaissance. So I look at this painting. It's at the Met if you ever go see it. And remember, you don't have to pay it to get in the Met. It only costs a nickel. Just say, I want a pen, and give them a nickel, even though it says $24. It's a free museum. Peter Bruegel, check this picture out. All right, this is a landscape, but it's got people in it, right? But it also describes a total sociological and cultural system, right? So basically, they're harvesting wheat for bread. He teaches you how to do it over there with a guy with the scythe, right? He's showing you how it's done, how it's laid out. Then it's stacked up, right? The women do the stacking, it looks like. They stack it up. They're actually eating bread right here that they've made. She's cutting it. They're under an apple tree, right? So they got some apple. Here's the water, which is kept cool in the wheat right here, right? The bread is going out to they're carrying the bread out to this wagon. And then this wagon is going to go to that ship. That ship's going to sail the bread out so they can build a church and a school and a playground. So in this one picture, and there's, you know, a guy sprawled out with a big cod piece on. So there's always a little humor in Bruegel. But in this one picture, he basically tells you the story of an entire culture. their economic system, their social system, divisions of labor, how the people dress. He's a real documentary photographer. He's a real documentary artist, and like, this is how we understand this place. And he does it in a interesting way. He does it from about 20 feet high. Like, the camera, well, it's not a camera, of course, is about 20 feet high. It's not on the ground. It's not first-person narration. And it's not like God looking down at the little ants, crawling on the earth. It's like this omniscient narrator who describes everything perfectly, from the fire, the hunting dogs coming back, the rabbits over the guy's shoulder, the ice skating kids, the birds, and even this weed that's just kind of, I don't know, it's just not a really pleasant weed, right? It's just kind of like a, I don't know, forsythia or something sprouting out of the ground right in the middle of the frame, because it too has importance. Even though it's not a thing of beauty, it has importance. It's a omniscient eye that paints everything really tenderly, and it's much like photography. So I kind of took his idea in a way and like elevated the camera to try to get a narrative, people in the landscape and the landscape itself. So like these recreational hunter slash drinkers in Kentucky who like get out on the weekend and just go out in the woods and run around. And it's also important to me that this is a good time for black and white to come in, to like connect my work to the work of 1870s, to like make it look kind of like that early American landscape photography. So I print them in these kind of muted tones, and they're printed as if they were on really old paper in a way, except they're quite a bit larger. This is a organic slash contraband farmer and his intern. So this is a fish tournament in Chattanooga, where I'm from, and I'm on the roof of this building with my camera, and this camera, it's a 8 by 10 inch camera, like I said, and it takes about a second or half a second or a second to expose the film. So a lot of these pictures kind of set up. I mean, I have to. In fact, the guy, Preacher Jones on the microphone, is actually saying, well, this fella up here on the roof wants to take a picture, but he's requesting that everyone be perfectly still. And I'm like, he goes, all right, tell us when you do it. So I click the button. He goes, are you finished? I'm like, yeah, I'm finished. He goes, okay. Well, this is Jeremy Jackson with 18 pounds and 4 ounces of largemouth bass, and they're having this fishing tournament. So I'm kind of like working in and out of the crowd, and it's almost like I'm the performer. I'm the performer of these photographs. You don't really see that part of it. And this picture of the Eno River is a photographer named Stephen Shore, I think, and something he said to me really helped me make this picture. He said, because I was having this discussion, I'm like, if I'm taking crowds of people, and lots of people in the frame, and not trying to like get everybody to be motionless, how do you do it? How do you like get everybody to be still? And Stephen Shore is he's kind of this like, I don't know, Yoda figure of photography. And he says, well, you know how if you're in a crowd of people in a cafeteria, and all at once the crowd will be silent. You know that mystery that happens? He said, it happens the same with motion. If there's a crowd in motion, that all at once they'll be still. But you can't look at any one particular person. You have to look at them all at the same time. And this is kind of what I was doing with this picture, like making sure this guy doesn't walk out of the frame, trying to figure out when people are still, and so it's frozen in time a little bit. And luck plays an important role. And it makes me think a lot about like what the strategy of a hunter is like being somewhere, not really looking at anything, but just kind of waiting for usually nothing to happen. This is kind of a funny story. So I'm in Kentucky, and these two guys had given me a ride up on a mountain on a four-wheeler, and so I've got my back to them, and I'm photographing this landscape down below. And so I finished, and I turn around, and they're laying like that, watching me, and I just like, despite myself, I said, hold it right there. Just don't move a muscle, I've got to take your picture. And so I swing my camera around, and I get up under the dark cloth, and one guy says to me, he says, you want me to go over there and hug up on him? And right then I was like, wow, everybody's like postmodern. Everybody knows exactly what the power of image is. You know, it's like he's kind of more on top of it than I am. And he's kind of more knowing what's going on than I am. So I got interested in kind of camouflage, especially contemporary camouflage like mossy oak and stuff like that, because they're made of pictures. You know, it's actually pictures that you wrap yourself up into. And when you do that, you become lethal. You know, it's kind of a scary thing. And it has a very powerful slimming dynamic too, somehow. But this is John Mark, and I've done 1 million photo sessions with John Mark. And this is beginning of my Turkey Hunter series, which the film at the end is about that. I even made some of my own camouflage. This is a ghillie suit made from the plant that he's kind of growing out of. So, these are my wild men, right? These guys. And I got inspired to like, what makes men wild? I'm attracted. I'm like totally into it. I think it's awesome. But there's also something scary about it. And as I kind of researched a little bit about wild men, I came across this quote in Simon Schama's Landscape and Memory. And he said, he says about this was a print made by Martin Schongauer in 1480. And he said, for much of the Middle Ages, hairy, cannibalistic, sexually omnivorous wild men and women had represented the antithesis of the civilized Christian. But in the later part of the 15th century, wild men were made over into exemplars of the virtuous and natural life. So I love that schism where they balance between being this like predatory kind of animal and also like this keeper of knowledge. Now, I have a wild man in my life is my Uncle Tim, who was both that. He was like, he is a keeper of a secret knowledge that is pretty amazing. He, like one day, he catches these sucker fish that come out of the creeks, that flow up the creeks, and he said, I said, gosh, I want to photograph you catching these sucker fish. And he said, well, Jeff, when the first dogwood petal hits the ground, that's when they start running. And when he said that, I was like, who knows that clock? What clock? Who knows that? That's not something you can't get that on the internet or in a book. It's just it's a clock being inside nature, and so you know. But he's also, you know, he takes fish out of the Kingston steam plant, which is, you know, highly radioactive and full of mercury, and you know, he's never had you know, he's in and out of trouble, but he's like the exemplar of this natural life and also like the antithesis of the civilized Christian at the same time. So that's why I love my Uncle Tim. Anyway, this is a wildlife biologist. I did a series of portraits, wildlife biologist as kind of shaman. He's not reading the Quran there. He's reading a biology logbook in the Okefenokee Swamp. And this is Bub. This is self-portrait with catfish. Mingo boys with water snake. And this is St. Jerome, painted in 1495, kind of mid-Renaissance. Now, St. Jerome was this person who, well, he translated the Bible from Latin into Latin. So he did that. So he was a scholar, but he lived in a cave and beat himself with a rock. Right, here's the rock. He was a penitent Hermetic monk, penitent Hermetic saint who punished himself, wore a hair shirt, which is, that's a hair shirt, which would irritate his skin all the time, beat himself with rocks, and lived in a cave, ate locust, and was protected by a lion that he took the thorn out of his paw. So he's like an incredible scholar wild man, and got me, and is a great transition into my next body of work, which is caves. So there was this cave where I grew up, and this is actually it. This is Wolf Teeper Cave. And we used to go in there and as teenagers and like smoke pot and drink Robitussin and just that was our like little hangout in the cave in there. And all the other, when we walk in, we weren't scared of bears or snakes, just a little bit. We were scared of other teenagers, other bigger teenagers in there. So it was always very wild in there, but it was always really kind of safe and secure. Now, inside the cave, there were hundreds, thousands and thousands of names. Some dated from 160 years ago. As my older brother, Greg, wrote his name in the cave, and my best friend, Darrell Walker's father's name was in the cave. And it was dated 1965, which was 4 years before Darrell was born. Being in that cave was dangerous and exhilarating. We felt wild and safe at the same time. As you crawled through this tiny, tiny little passage you had to squeeze through, we called it the eye of the needle. There was this room at the end that was so huge you could fit this whole building into it, and we called that the mall. And sometimes we would go into the mall and like sit on this rock and turn the flashlights off and like turn all our lights off and just kind of hold our breath and not make a sound. And you have get this weird feeling like an out-of-body experience. Like there was no sensation. It was completely quiet, completely dark, and the air was completely still, and you could almost like come out of yourself. The cave itself, the cave in general, marks an undeniable chapter in our human story. In the Pleistocene era, the cave served as an invaluable and physical and spiritual shelter. And its symbology remains a cornerstone of Western culture today. And Plato writes the allegory of the cave. St. John wrote the book of Revelations in a cave. Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, went into a cave to find the wild that he always wanted. And of course, Luke Skywalker goes into the cave to see that Darth Vader is really his father. All of these stories are derived from an experience of the human subconscious. And being in a cave is kind of like being in a subconscious. It's dark, it's darkness, your senses are completely diminished. You have like these intense feelings of fear and fascination. Nothing is familiar. There's no even ground to walk on. There's no horizon line. And so your body is like this well-adapted tool, and it becomes becomes very psychological experience being in a cave. And I think what happens in a cave is when you get into that experience that there's an instinctual urge to mark your existence or mark, it's not even marking your territory, it's basically remarking your existence, or I was here is basically what a lot of cave marks are. So I think the cave kind of elicits these marks. So all of the caves I photographed in this period were saltpeter caves. These caves were mined for saltpeter, which was made into gunpowder during the Civil War. So these caves became really famous caves in kind of local history. Like basically a million years of bat urine stains the ground. That urine has nitrates in it. If you distill out the nitrates, it's explosive. That's how it works. So in these caves, there's a record of history. So for instance, these marks right here are tally marks. And these marks signify one bag of salt, one bag of cave dirt hauled to the entrance to be distilled into saltpeter. They were probably done by slaves right around 1860, during the war. Then we have a date of 1892, a smiley face probably from the mid-70s. And then this is a marking from the Caving Society pointing you like which direction to go out. And this is another one. See all the tally marks on the front? And then there's tattoo gem rocks, right? There's a date in there from 1911. So these are probably from the 1860s. And then the star from MySpace, which I find incredibly fascinating because MySpace is what, 6, 7 years ago and already defunct, I guess, isn't it? And so like there's all this like defunct language, and then there's this just beautiful artistic blue and purple layered on each other right next to orange that becomes kind of this abstraction. So so there's 100 years of graffiti on these caves, and it goes from like funny to like culturally significant. And I'm looking at these not like it's graffiti, but it's like art that's culturally significant, right? And it's easy to compare this work to the work that was done in the Pleistocene. Like in the Pleistocene era, let's see, where are we? Like in the Pleistocene era, they were really into depictions of animals, depictions of nature, realistic depictions of nature. Our interest is different. Our interest is in in depictions of identity, in abstract, and it forms abstract fields of color. And it's almost a depictions of personal consciousness or personal statements, right? So here we have hell, cavern, war. You know, we have enter. We have some band names. We have people's names, and we live in in a society that's very comfortable with like abstract art. This one is particularly interesting to me because this is an autograph, Johnny, but it's written probably in the late 70s. I kind of became a pro at analyzing spray paint colors and spray paint and how paint is sprayed on. And it's exactly like the Johnson & Johnson signature on the Johnson & Johnson label, right, with a pointed J. And so here's another like postmodern moment where this person has practiced this autograph that he had acquired from a Johnson & Johnson label, and figured out how to climb higher than anyone else almost to put it in this really excellent space. Well, these are autographs too from 30,000 years ago, right? The handprint dipped in ochre mud and slapped on a cave. This is the first negative, right? This is charcoal, where you get some charcoal off your fire and chew it up. drink you some water and get it all like chewed up in there, and put your hand down and go, and you see this guy's missing some fingers. Not really. This is his signature, right? So in caves you'll see this, which we all know what that means. But we see this. We see people folding their fingers, and you can see how easily that becomes an alphabet, right? That becomes a signifier in an alphabet. So we're not doing things that are terribly different than they were doing. In fact, they were us. We were the same species and had the same brain capacity, and they weren't idiots back then. You can see a painted hallway, right? Instead of what has just changed culturally is our interest is in us, not in nature anymore. My interest in this project not only was comparing contemporary cave art to Pleistocene era cave art, but it was also in comparing contemporary cave art to contemporary art. Like, look at this. This was 1864. What's happened here is probably Christian has practiced his signature under an oil lamp made of fat, and you can only see that much, and then he finally kind of comes into it, H. Chris in 1864, and it's kind of, this scrawl becomes a signature. Much like the work of Cy Twombly, who's an American painter, died just this year. I found his work very inspirational looking at the cave art. There's a Cy Twombly. His work is about scrawl, the primitive mark making, the first mark, the scrawl. And what you also see in caves is these passages, usually about a mile in for a long time in, and these passages of cultural signifiers. You have a swastika, a mushroom, a pot leaf, a penis, anarchy symbol, a guy, rainbows sometimes, and they're layered in these abstract fields of color. So here's another one. 420. So this is deep in the cave. Usually there's not a lot of graffiti at the entrance. It's usually deep in where people feel like, okay, we've gone far enough in. We should really remark on it. But I find it much like the work of Jean-Michel Basquiat, who was a painter in the 80s, who is also using these abstract passages of color, but also using like cultural signifiers of skulls, and he was very much into a graffiti type of language. Also, the cave itself makes its own art. The entropy of the rock and the water become its own kind of sculpture. So I really got into like how the cave becomes a body. And so you're layering the earth, the statements of people, the history, and in this entropy of rock and water, I'm really reminded of the work of Louise Bourgeois, who's just also died last year, a contemporary sculptor who made stone works about the body, or Lee Bontecu, who made these extruded canvas work of these black holes, kind of a proto-feminist work. So, back to Bruegel. So, Bruegel's Harvesters is a work that's comprehensive. It describes the sociology of a people, their work, economy, leisure, style, sexuality, and their struggle to stay alive on this earth. It's a masterpiece. And there are things that only art can do. This is a history lesson that you see all at once. Likewise, the work of Anselm Kiefer, a little bit more contemporary, painted in the 1970s, and a little bit more abstract. But this painting is called Nero Paints. It depicts a cultivated field that's been destroyed and ravaged by war. The farmhouses that are burning, their roofs are on fire. And on top of it is this dripping palette of paintbrushes, kind of describing Nero fiddling while Rome burns and an artist painting while the world goes to hell. It's a personal, it remarks about his kind of personal guilt about being a German and being an artist and making art at a devastating time. But nonetheless, he's powerless. It also describes the powerlessness over the primitive urge to make marks and the primitive urge to make art. It's not a history lesson that you necessarily really get told or even see. It's one you kind of feel with your body. And finally, there's this wall of the cave in Tennessee, in Wolf Teaver Cave. By the nature of its primordial magnetic attraction in the explorer to make marks upon a cave wall, and by the complete protection of the element, this wall archives an epic of voices. And here these voices are made a matter of earth. There are tally marks from the saltpeter miners in 1865. Edna Goss in beautiful cursive scripts. Skulls and crossbones, a swastika, a smiley face. Go to Hell, Stacy L. is up there. True Love Forever for Matt Rodriguez. Terry S., class of 1983. Drawn voices of lovers and haters, soldiers, explorers, and a big orange arrow from the Cave Protection Society pointing you the way out. It too is a history lesson. It's not a history lesson you necessarily can ever see unless you go there and you feel it and you smell it and you see it all at the same time. And it's a picture about our history. It's a picture, our attempts to conquer each other and conquer nature, and our persistence to survive. I made this work from the perspective of a sociologist, a human evolutionist, an artist, and a native son. And what I think this work does is marks upon our ability to survive and our instinct to succeed and our instinct to mark our survival for other generations to see. And thank you very much. That's it. So now, if you got to go somewhere, now would be the time to do it. I'm going to show a 14-minute film, and I won't be offended if you leave. But if you want to stay, just buckle yourselves in for a little while. We're going to take you on a long, slow. I'm worried a little bit about the audio. I wish we could have it a little louder, but we're going to do it the way it is done.
Night chair file thing here. What that is a tree call. It's just like a hen waking up in the tree in the morning, real soft. Nothing loud. You always want to start real soft in case a bird's real close to you. You don't want to scare it. As it gets more lighter, it gets a little louder. Oh, it hates a gobble though. I found the best way to make them gobble in the morning. It's just let a crow call. Now I'm starting to get lonely. Come on, boys. See, I'm not a jealous hen. I don't mind if my gobbler's down there screwing another woman right now. He can go ahead and do that and get his nut on. I'll just be up there clucking and purring and feeding. Come on and see me when you got time. You can bring that girl with you, I don't care. What do you have, boys? Been about as sweet as I can be. Down my loving. I got food over here, I got some pussy. I'm waiting on it, but I'm kind of getting anxious. That's why I buttered at him a couple times. getting very agitated. But I still love you. That's just pure desperation. Where are you, boy? Where are you? Jim, he's walking into the field. I'm over here, boy. Yeah, motherfucker, I love you too. Just don't. I see you, pretty motherfucker. Oh, I see you. Come on over, big boy. If you don't come to me, I'm gonna put that out of bird. I see you, buddy. I'm gonna fuck right here. Not over there. Come on, pretty mama, bring him on here. I love you too, buddy. Slowly but surely, he's gonna burn. Slowly but surely.
ready, come on. I'm ready, buddy, come on.
All right, that's the show for this evening. I'll stay and answer some questions if you want me to. I got to say, though, I love the thanks for being a great audience. I showed this movie a couple times in New York, and nobody laughed once. And I'm like, isn't there any just nervous laughter out there in the crowd? And everybody was just like, and then they kind of look at me like, what was that? So I'm glad that you found some at least sick humor in it. But thank you very much. If you want, I'll stick around and answer some questions if anybody's got any. Yeah? Yeah. Have I what? In his photo? No, I've never photographed my uncle and his suckerfish. I'm on a different clock than he is, and when the dogwood petal falls, I'm usually like teaching a class or something like that. And I think that actually creek that he gets suckerfish, I don't think they migrate anymore up Emery Creek. I know they don't because that is exactly where that big coal spill was. So it's probably gone. Yeah?
Did you use color in the caves?
Yeah, I basically used color in the caves because it was a necessity. The rocks and the paint, it just needed to be more expressive. I just kind of wanted to get the expressive nature of the caves out. Somebody had. They did, and that's totally very good question. I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking about that today. But they took a whole bunch of pictures and drove around that area, and I basically got the negatives and blew those up in the exhibit too. So they went to the old home sites, and it was. I think it was really. Very complicated for them to see all that stuff down there, but they wouldn't have missed it for the world. The 82 drawdown.
How long did they do that?
I think they had to repair the dam in '82. Do you know?
It's cheaper now. From what I hear from PBA now, it's cheaper now to pay divers than it is to draw down the lake because it's millions of tourist dollars that they
Yeah.
It takes 3 years to build that.
Yeah. So they drained the whole lake and all the trees, everything, house foundations, fence lines, and everything were down there. It's a bizarre. It looks I don't know what it looks like. It looks like not a nuclear bomb, but it looks like like it was in the desert. Yeah. Any other questions? Wait, hold on, Mike.
So a certain amount of trust has to be established for you to be able to film or photograph these people. And I'm curious about your approach and immersion into the wild man culture.
Yeah, very, very good question. And it's, you know, it's the best part of what I do because I found that the trust is established, and I've known a lot of these guys now for 10 years, so, but the trust is established. I'm going to show you one picture, and if I can get this back up, I'll show you one picture, but the trust can be established instantly, and it can take 10 years. But in this picture here, it was a real lesson to me as how to basically handle, let's see if I can find it without being taking too long. With this one. I think I just hit this, I believe. Where's slideshow? View, slideshow. No, yeah, it is. This picture. So these guys were total strangers. Oh, I have to go through all of it. These guys were total strangers to me, and I was dropped off out in the middle of the woods with these guys who were coal miners, and just very, very suspect as people who have, Appalachian people have been really documented in kind of death. So they were very suspect of what I was doing, and so they were like, "Well, what are you doing? Who are you doing this for? What are you doing?" And my backup was gone. I was like, "Oh my God!" And so I said, "Well, I'm an individual artist. I'm an artist, and I'm like to make a book of this work sometime. I show it in galleries. What exactly do you want to show?" And I basically give them my art talk and say, I want to show about like how people kind of commune with nature, and like people are out here in nature, and it's not just like person against nature, but it's also with nature, and well, why do you come here? I said, well, this is an abandoned strip mine, and so it's got this history, and so basically talking about contemporary art issues, and that was, and people they kind of got it, and why do you use this big old camera? And I would tell them some of the technical aspects about the camera, and then like the trap is, would you like to look through the camera to see? And once you look through an 8 by 10 inch camera, the world completely, literally gets turned upside down. So they're like, okay, what do you want us to do? But a lot of this trust issue is very important to me, and it sometimes, I've worked with, those were 7 different turkey hunters that I worked 3 different turkey seasons to do. It's I guess about 12 different hunts. And, to prove that I'm kind of crazy enough to get up at 3:50 in the morning and not have a gun and just go out and watch these guys hunt, I think they see, that I'm pretty dedicated to what I want to do. But I think it's one of the most interesting issues that doesn't get shown in the pictures necessarily, but it's the most interesting issue about the work. And Mike, do you want to ask something? Oh. So, anybody else?
Do the hunters often narrate the hunt while you're not there? Or is that
No, never. So I basically had a wireless lavalier microphone like I'm wearing now, and I asked several hunters to narrate their hunts, and there's a million different kind of hunters, and usually the response is, this is a wake-up call. This is a mating call. And so I would have to, and so with the hunters, I coached them, I directed them. I was like, what are you saying? What are you saying? Well, I'm saying wake up. Like, it's all about, turkey hunt's all about sex. So so finally I got Bart, who's a complete pervert. And so he was like, oh, I thought we were like doing like a hunting documentary for like, you know, the you know, Outdoor Network. And I'm like, no, this is art. You can be as dirty as you want. He's like, oh, well, I got stuff going through my head. so he was great. So he was just very, very explicit, and that's basically, he just translated what he was saying in English, and he's also known as kind of the greatest turkey caller in South Carolina. Everybody, once he gets his limit, everybody hires him out to call him in, and because he is a female turkey too, and he's projecting his fantasy, his turkey sex fantasy out there, and you know he's. But that's another trust issue. I had to kind of work with these guys, you know, for a long time, and you know, I'm not a hunter really. You know, I just I enjoy. You know, I'm a biologist. It's hard for me to be like a hunter, even though biologists probably kill more animals than hunters. but you know, I enjoy the culture quite a bit, and the characters, and being out in the landscape.
Why did you omit the animal sequence?
You know, I don't. Sometimes I put it in, and sometimes I take it out. But I did omit that series for this talk. I kind of omitted it and then put the snake in the bucket as a prelude. But it doesn't fit perfectly into kind of a trajectory, which this is an academic talk. And this is not how artists work. You know, I'm also working on a bunch of other things that have kind of not much to do with this visually, and don't take the. You know, this is kind of an art history talk. It takes that kind of trajectory. So I have this other work that's animals in buckets. Basically, I just went around with an 8x10 camera and a bucket, and I caught an animal, put it in a bucket, and took a picture of it. And so I didn't know really where to kind of put that in the thing. But it's on my website, Animals in Buckets. It's called Zoology. All right, that looks like it's going to about do it. And appreciate y'all coming out. Thank you very much. And see you later.